Fine people of the interwebs, here we are. Hopefully you can hear me. It is it's Wednesday again. And good evening, good afternoon, good morning. And we're starting off with a question, and we'll do some housekeeping. I apologize for not being here last week. I'm also slightly annoyed because Stream Deck is not behaving itself. I keep going to a profile, which I need for this episode, and it keeps resetting it, which is just completely annoying. I think it's tied in with Ecamm somehow, but it is frustrating to no end, and we'll get it all sorted out. I don't know why it's doing it, but we'll get by. We'll make it happen. So here we are. And let's just do the housekeeping part of today before I jump into this bad boy over here, the X-H2S, and talk about this camera some more. So firstly, first Wednesday of every month, Camera and Flask. If you don't know what that is, that's myself, Caleb Pike from DSLR Video Shooter, and Ben Barden from benbarden.co.uk. All good friends, and we have a drink or two, and we talk about equipment. Sometimes we have challenges. Next week, it is next week, right? Next week, we will be talking about this sort of new crop of super 35 millimeter cameras in mirrorless form. So this is one of them. We've got the FX30, which was just announced today. And then, of course, the R7. And I think it might be a good idea to talk about all of those. The one that none of us, I don't think, by next week will have had hands-on time with is the FX30, which is basically the FX3, but with a super 35 millimeter sensor. A few other things that are different, but a pretty interesting camera nonetheless. A month from next Wednesday, we will be doing the next challenge for Camera and Flask. And it's very similar to the last challenge. Hopefully more people will participate. It's already posted on the channel, so go check it out and start figuring out what your inspired frame is going to be. I think there should be less confusion this time than last time. We hope that the people who submitted last time submit this time and all of that great stuff. And is there anything else I need to do for housekeeping? Well, just answer some questions here in the chat before I get into all of this. And shout outs to Brandon, 360 grad, David, Thaddeus, Harrison. We've got Rick here. So all good. And first question coming from Brandon. Jem, what's a good clamp with a baby pin that can attach to a 3-inch pipe? 3-inch pipe. Need to hang some lights from a pipe on the ceiling. Seen Matthew's center jaw clamp, but still looking. I would say Cardellini or Mathellini clamps are your way to go. There are very specific pipe clamps as well. I think I might have one or two up here. But a 3-inch pipe is pretty darn big. I have 1.25 inches up here in my grid, and that's about that big. So 3-inch pipe, you're going to need something pretty large. So I would say Cardellini or Mathellini. If my eye lines, by the way, are a little funky right now, I will say upgraded to a larger teleprompter, and I'm still getting used to where the camera is. So I'm going in the general direction. Let's see what happens. But yeah, Cardellini, Mathellini, or pipe clamps. The advantage to a pipe clamp is it has the baby pin built into it. So do Cardellini's and Mathellini's. But it's really designed specifically for pipes. There's so many solutions there, but Matthew's studio equipment would be probably where I would go. There's also a pretty cool system, though I don't know if it goes all the way up to 3 inches, that Kupo makes, Kupo. And it's like a ring collar that goes around the pipe, and it locks into place. So it's pretty cool. And it's adjustable depending on the size of the pipe. They have 2 sizes. So you need the large one, and you'd also need to check to see if it fits 3-inch pipe. And then there's other clamps that Matthews has as well. So there you go. And let's see what else we've got here. Good that you're working on your challenge, David. Don't spend as much time as that. Oh, and then the other thing you could think about is a super clamp or a Mayfer clamp, which is also used all of the time in still photography and production, video production, filmmaking. And it's a monster of a clamp, and you can have a pin come off of it, though I still think the other one's probably. Yep. And I wouldn't use fabric tape. David has well, don't use paper tape. You can use fabric tape, which would be gaffer's tape on the pipe. And that way, when you're clamping down, it has a little bit more to grip onto, because pipes tend to not have a lot to grip onto. They're smooth surface. And there you go. Rick just finished the Matterport real estate gig today. Not exactly video, but pretty cool tech. I agree. I've looked at many a house. In fact, the house that we sold 5 years ago, they Matterported that sucker. One last thing for housekeeping, and I don't know if it's going to work because this whole thing is just being weird, but let's just see. I'm going to do a test here. So we're going to go boom. There we go. Okay, so this is the first in-person workshop that I am doing tied into a conference that I've done in 3 years. So this is going to be tied into and around NAB New York. I'm actually going to be gone by the time the show starts, but I'm flying in on the 14th of October. We're setting up all day on the 15th, and then doing the workshop on the 16th. There is a discount if people want to attend this. And the focus really is, let's see if this works, small to no crew, corporate, in-house, and remote production. So also including stuff that's come about in a big way in the last couple of years. So just in terms of kicking this thing off and getting going, any other questions that people have in the live stream right now, just put an @the C47 before you do that. That would be awesome. And I'm also, because Stream Deck is being a pain in the butt, I'm going to have to get my mouse where it needs to be for some of these cuts that I'm going to have to do later on when we start talking about this camera. So, questions? Going once? Going twice? Going... Okay, no questions for now. All right, let's start talking about what we would consider part 2 of the Fujifilm X-H2S, which is a camera I've now had for a little while, and I've started to shoot with it. I'm using one right over there for the live stream. That's the A camera. This camera right here, that's the X-T4. This camera right here is absolutely nothing. And this camera right here is the X-T3. So there you go. And why is this one nothing? Well, that one's nothing because it's this camera. So if I turn that on and I go to there, then you'll see that's the X-H2S. So we're going to get into this camera a little bit. I'm going to start to talk about some things that I'm finding out about the camera, mostly positive. And I'm also going to talk a little bit about this little audio unit that's made specifically for this camera. Well, it's made specifically for this camera and other cameras out there on the market in different versions. We're also going to talk about this little fan unit, which you may or may not have seen in the past. You know that there is one. I'm assuming if you didn't, there is a fan unit that you can get as a separate component for the X-H2S. And we're just going to have a conversation about this camera and some of the things, again, that I found out about it. And I think this is going to continue as we go forward with using this. So body-wise, I like the camera. I like the grip. I like the size of the camera. I'd like to get a cage. I'm starting to see some cages come to market now from Wooden Camera. There's a cage that I just saw on newshooter.com that Tilta came out with. I don't like the look of the small rig stuff that they've come out with in the past. And they do have a small rig cage over there on the X-T4. So that's kind of the next thing, because having a cage with cheese plate, functionality gives you a lot more places to rig, but it also makes the camera bigger. But I think a small cage on here would make a lot of sense, and I'll definitely be looking into that in the future. So I think what we'll do is jump right into the menus. You are probably gonna have to let me just go in here and change my HDMI output setting to push the displays. And there we go. So you'll see that that's an option inside of the menus. And if you're familiar with any of the XT series cameras, there are some things that are different about this camera. First one is the fact that we have this movie setting list. And this is not something that's in the previous versions that I'm aware of their cameras. So it's a quick way to get to settings related to certain functionality of the camera. And then if I step out of there, and you can see that it'll jump over and give you access if you select things and go into here, into that menu. So it's just giving you fast options to get into certain things inside of the camera related to how you're using it. But it's not the only way. There's also the Q button on here. So if I press that, it's on the back of the camera. I get to these settings right here. So Q off, Q on, and you'll see that I can change from manual to autofocus modes. I can change my shutter speed. I can change recording options. I can change white balance here. There's a back dial. And if I turn that and I go to Kelvin, then I can go down here and I can dial my Kelvin temperature in to the camera as well. So nice quick access to most of the functions that you would need to get to inside of the camera. I will say, after using the X-T3 and X-T4 for a long time, I really miss that dedicated ISO dial right here on the left-hand side. I kind of like the dual dial functionality, but having this little display here with your options on the top of the camera is really nice. It's basically over here. You have this display that you can turn the light on, and it gives you all your core settings. So it's nice to have that functionality on the camera itself, and dedicated buttons here for ISO, white balance, and getting to the things that you need. I will say, and let me just punch in here, make sure that we get a shot of this. I will say that this little joystick here is not my favorite. It's okay, but I prefer the sort of nubby kind of style that used to be over here on the X-T4. We still have a D-pad, and it's easy to get around and find everything, but I just don't love the feeling of this. I feel like it's, well, I don't know. I'm not going to say it's a downgrade, but part of it's probably that I'm so used to the other joystick that for me that's a little bit of an issue. So let's jump back into the menus here. Shooting mode, you can decide how you want to do that. Movie mode is a big one. This is where you're choosing your different resolutions and your aspect ratios, and you can see there that you have a 6.2K option in here. Essentially open gate, a 3.2. So that's pretty cool. And then high speed recording. You can push over HDMI, but really, when we're talking about internal, what options show up really depend on what you're choosing here in this left column. So I'm generally going to shoot UHD 4K. So I've got an option for 120p conforming to 2398 or 24 or 5994 or 2997. And if I switch over to 100, then that's really going to be for PAL. So you're going to have 25p, 50p, and those are going to be your options. And remember that this is conforming. Whoops, I need to show that to you again. Just realized I went into the menus and I apologize. Keep me on track, everybody over here, okay? Even though the last comment is from 360 grad is smooth pipe. So back to this. Now I'm in the menu. I just have to remember on the ATEM to switch over. So we're in high speed recording. We're going to go in here, and if it's off, then that's where I started. I'm going to go to on, and you'll see here that depending on your resolution and your aspect ratio on the left-hand side will determine what other options you have. And here, for instance, for 4K 16:9, I can do 120 and then conform to one of these various frame rates. And then over here, if I go to 100, then I'm conforming to PAL 25 or 50p. So we'll switch that back over here and to 2398, and everybody gets the idea. Now, one thing to understand that when you're doing this, Rick, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Look at this. Coming in strong. A super chat. I appreciate it. What? Oh, yeah, you can't even read the. See, that's the other thing. It's not showing this in its entirety. It needs to, well, I'm going back and forth with Ecamm. Little things. But I appreciate that they're constantly updating everything. Also, am I in focus? We'll talk about the focus thing in a minute. I'm not using AF right now, but I'd be interested in terms of that. All right, so thank you again, Rick. Here we go. So high-speed recording. So here's the thing to note about that. When you're in high-speed recording, it is essentially cropping. Okay, so when you're going to like 120, it's going to do a 1.38 crop. So the reason that this fixed movie crop magnification option is here is not only to give you a little bit more reach, sorry, pressing the wrong button here, to give you a little bit more reach when you're shooting with the camera if you need it. So I'm cropped in now. But when you're switching between high-speed recording and a standard frame rate, then you're not going to see a change in terms of the field of view. Okay, exposure should change because we're shooting at a 5x, so less light's coming into the camera, and you have to think about your shutter speed and all of that fun stuff. So when you're going into something like, let's do that 5x recording here, you'll see that it automatically changes, and we'll have to dial that in later on, potentially, because you can see that there's some flicker because of the shutter speed. It automatically changes the shutter speed. Now, we're shooting at 120 frames per second. If we wanted the same cadence as what we would be seeing if we're shooting at, let's say, 2398, and we're shooting at a shutter of a 48th or a 180 degree shutter, then we'd want to go ahead and change our shutter speed, right? So that's what we would do. And generally, if we're shooting at 120, we'd want our shutter speed to be 240. Do you have to do that? No, you don't. And you can see here as I'm changing my shutter speed that we're seeing different levels of flicker here. There's some options in here that we can use to help with that, but just know that there is a formula when you're shooting high speed in terms of your frame rate versus your shutter speed. So if we're going to go to 120, generally you want to set your shutter to 240, especially when you're conforming, because now that's a lot less light coming into the camera. So you have to think about that. And you either have to, in an interior location, feed your frame with a lot of light to compensate for that, or you have to cheat your shutter and maybe shoot with a slower shutter speed, or, well, generally you need to give it more light. Everybody gets the idea. So let's go in here, turn this off, and we're going to go down here and turn the crop off. Now here's one that I found pretty interesting, which is, and I'm going to go over to the X-T4 in a second, which is, so the way this is set up right now, I have it so that when it's recording to an internal card inside of the camera, and it's also pushing a signal out over HDMI, that it's going to use the film simulation that I have chosen in the camera. So it's going to be one of these film simulations, right? So that's the way it's set up at the moment. If I change that, I have the choice to either push F-Log or F-Log2 over HDMI and also record that internally to the card, or I can do HLG, which really for me is going to be for more broadcast applications, maybe live, but not something I would use personally for production. So take a look at this. It's really film simulation, F-Log or F-Log, F-Log2, F-Log2, HLG, HLG. That's a lot different than the options that were available in the X-T4. So I'm going to walk over to that camera right now, which is this camera, and I'm going to go into the menu for you and just show you how different it is. And I'm hoping that Fuji does that in the future. So let me just walk over. You're so patient, everybody. So here we are taking a look at the X-T4 menu, and you'll see it's considerably different. Now, there's no F-Log2. That doesn't exist on that camera. That's new to the X-H2S. But what's interesting is if you take a look at this menu, I can have film simulation recording to SD card and HDMI, F-Log to both, or I can choose one to one and one to the other, which to me is something I'd really like to see in the X-H2S. Why would I like to see that? Well, the reason I'd like to see it is there are going to be situations where, effectively, when I'm using a film simulation in a Fuji camera, it's a look. It's based on actual real film stocks that Fuji created, but it's also effectively a picture style or a picture profile. It's to my knowledge going to be a Rec 709 based simulation. I don't know if they're taking into consideration P3 in 2020 when Rec 2020 or BT 2020 when they're creating these, but there could be very likely situations in two scenarios for me where I'd want to push a film simulation externally. And because this camera is recording in ProRes anyway, I probably wouldn't use an external recorder, and then record F-Log or F-Log2, preferably to the internal card. So the two scenarios for me are this. I'm doing a live stream or something that's going out to the web, but I want to keep that footage and I want to have some flexibility with it. Well, that might be where I'd want to push the film simulation out over HDMI and then record log internally. So that's one scenario. The other scenario is just in regular production. Let's say we have a video village and you have a director or a client or somebody coming up to a monitor and you want them to be able to take a look at something that looks LUTed. Of course, you can just push the log out of HDMI and then LUT it with an external monitor or solution. That's also an option. So, you guys get the idea. Let me go ahead and turn off that menu real quick. I'll be very, very fast. Relatively fast. Let's just make sure I've got that. Yep, we got a clean there on that. So let's just go back into the menu here. And again, I'd love to see that. I'd like to see that flexibility of being able to push a film's, and even internally, bake the look internally and then push log externally to an external recorder. So give me some of those options. That would be pretty awesome. You can choose your data level setting now to video or full range, depending on what your NLE is or what you're using for post. So that's nice. There is a flickerless setting inside of here. Actually, let's just do a quick test. I don't think it's going to solve that problem that we were looking at before, but I want to just see. Let's go over here and we'll turn on high-speed recording. And I'm going to turn that on. We're going to take a look at it. I feel like I'm still seeing a little bit of flicker, to be honest with you. And yeah, it is from the Moray Amsterdam collection. Are you seeing any Moray? I'd like to know, because that's also something maybe to talk about, but not a major thing. So I'm still investigating. So we are definitely living in a film simulation. Good. All right, let's get back to business here. So when you go in here and you are choosing this flickerless shutter setting and you turn it on, what's interesting about it is it's not like an on-off switch that you would find in a lot of cameras. Now it is very granular in terms of the shutter speed. So what I can do is I can dial up or down. It's kind of like clear scan that you'll find in cameras. So this is reading in shutter speed instead of hertz, but effectively the same thing. So you can dial out, which is very, very cool. You can dial out your flicker when you're using this feature. So you can see how different that is and kind of unique in terms of implementation that I know of, though some of the other camera manufacturers may be doing that. So let's just go ahead and turn that off and get everything back to where it was, because there's still some other things to go over here. I'm not going into every single menu here, but let's turn off this high-speed recording, and then my exposure should get back to where it was. And the other thing that I want to do is just get my shutter back. I wish I could set it to 180-degree shutter as well. That would be awesome. Good to know that the S1H has it. Thanks, Harrison. I didn't know that. Haven't used that camera. And then over here, when you go into your F-Log recording, one of the things to take a look at is if I'm just on film simulation and I go to ISO, I can dial up or down my ISO, and I have a lot of flexibility there. You can see I can go down to 320 here, depending on my mode. That will change. For instance, if I go in here now and I change this to, let's do F-Log. Okay. Then you will see that when I go to my ISO, that 640 is the lowest ISO I can use. And then again, when I go in here to F-Log 2, which must be the base that they are using, you can see it's all lit up there. And 1250 is the base for ISO when you're shooting in F-Log 2. So that's where you got to be. And there you have it. All right, so let's go down here and take a look at a couple of other things. One thing that they still haven't changed here is the zebra setting. The lowest you can go is 50%. And one of the reasons that I really like it when you can go below 50% on zebras is generally when I am exposing for log and using a gray card. So I'm taking a gray card and putting it in the scene. I'm trying to get to somewhere between 40 and 50. I can use the histogram and kind of eyeball that. I can, of course, use an external monitor that has a waveform monitor. But if I am using the histogram, if I could set my zebras, well, if I am using the histogram, it's kind of a guess a little bit. when you put that gray card up and move it around. But if you could set your zebras to, let's say, 40, and then you started changing your exposure and it was on the gray card, as soon as you saw those stripes, you could back off just a third of a stop, and you'd basically be where you need to be, or you'd be right there. I mean, if you set it to 40 and you saw the zebras, then as soon as you see them, boom, you're done, or 45 or 50 or wherever you're going to set it. So I do wish that that feature was there. And I don't think it's a hard one to add to the camera. And now we're going to go ahead and talk about this cooling fan, which you can see here. So why? Why would we want this cooling fan? Well, quite honestly, I haven't had any real issues here with the camera in terms of overheating, except for in one situation, which is this teleprompter setup, where I had the camera kind of backed up to a wall, and the old hood that I had on the previous teleprompter, when you would basically put it over the lens, it would go over the camera a little bit, and it was a pretty warm environment, and I started getting overheating kind of warnings. Now, let me just show you. There's a setting inside of here where you generally can just run the camera, and it's not an issue in terms of auto power off for temp. You set it to, instead of standard, you set it to high, and your max temp will increase. Is it going to be a problem? I don't think so, but when I see an overheating warning, then it might make sense to put this onto the back of the camera. It's powered by the camera itself, and then there's a menu to go in there, and it just sits here. So it is restricting your screen position when you're using the camera itself. There's a little place here where you remove this little plastic cover, and then there's some pins, and you just put that in here, and the fan sits on the camera. I can tell you with real world experience that once I put this on the camera that was inside of the teleprompter setup, that I did not see any issues here. You'll see this little warning that also comes up. So it's smart. It knows that those pins have to be connected. Say, okay, I've confirmed it. And then essentially, when I go into the menus here, I'm going to go back up to where I was before, where we were in, let's find it, kids. There it is, cooling fan. And then you have these different settings. You probably can't hear that because I have noise assist on. There you go. Some funny comments, but there you go. Low, basically can't hear it. Auto, and then low fan noise. So low is really inaudible, so you might want to just do that. I'm a big fan of having constants when it comes to sound in an environment. So the more you can set something to a constant that's always there, as opposed to something that's kicking in and then turning off, kicking in, off, on, off. There you go. You get the basic idea. But the fan's there. You don't need to use it. And I think in most shooting situations, it's not going to be a problem. But if you are in a very warm environment, or, in terms of geographically, then it would be a piece of kit that I would get for the camera. Yep. There you go. All right. And off we go to the races. White balance stuff we're not going to spend a lot of time on. I will say that the ISO noise reduction is very good in this camera. I generally, if I'm shooting anything above like 20, usually 2500, I'm going to activate it, use like a +2. Sometimes I'll go a little higher if I'm going to be in really high ISOs. And I will say this is not an A7 series camera from Sony. This is not going to be the low light leader of the pack. It's very good in low light, but it's not a Sony camera. That camera, or those cameras, really take the cake there, and probably a close second with Canon. And that also is true in terms of autofocus. You know, my opinion is it's used to be Canon and then everybody else. Then Sony came in and just started creeping up. And now, from an AF standpoint, I would say that it's really Sony, then Canon, and then third from everything that I've shot is Fuji. But it does hunt. It's definitely better than it was on the X-T4. But I do find, because it's adjusting focus, and again, much better than it was on the X-T4, but that sometimes introduces an exaggerated moire pattern. And at first I thought it might be the glass of the teleprompter, but then I did some tests, not. And it's not really a big deal. Yeah, in-camera noise reduction. You got it, Rick. If I can get it right in camera, I'm going to do it. That's me, but you know, that's the way I like to do it. All right, so I'm just trying to think of if there's any other menus here that I want to go over here that are significant before I get into the actual audio side of things. And I will say here that I'm not a big fan of touchscreen on a camera like this. So I usually have most of that stuff off, but that's just me. And before we get into audio, let's just talk about time code. Not that this is any eye-opener for everybody, but I tend to use free run time code, which is just a continuous time code. And then you set the starting time code for that. Most people will do free run that is based on a manual input, which is usually time of day, or using the camera's current time, which in this case, so I'll just show that to you. So here's free run. Rec run is really every single clip that you start and stop starts with 0 and then goes up, you know, hours, minutes, seconds, frames, and then starts at 0 again. And then free run is just a continuous time code. So you can go in here and you can input a time based on a 24-hour clock. You can use current time, which is based on your camera's actual date and time. So whatever this time is what it will use for your time code when you choose that option. So if I say current time, boom, there it is. You'll see it grabs the clock from the camera. So make sure that that's right. The thing to understand is if you do that, and then you go down here and you change your clock, let's just say I'll do that right now, 16. And now it's 16, you'll see that my time code on the camera is still at 15 or 3:38. So if you're going to change the clock, just know that it's not changing your time code if you set it up that way. I, of course, had the right time in here, so I'm going to go ahead and set that back. And now my time code in that will match because it was based on that. Now, you're probably going to get some drift over time. So my recommendation would be check your camera's clock. You know, these are pretty accurate nowadays in terms of time, and just set your time to your phone as long as it's on and you have GPS and all that fun stuff happening. And then set it, and you should be fine. And you can do that with multiple. Of course, you could essentially jam sync and use a Tentacle or a Deity when those are really in the market to push time code into these cameras too and match them. So it just depends on your workflow and how many cameras you're shooting with, so on and so forth. And here we go. Let's talk about audio, if you're down for that. So audio menu here, lots of different options. And this is really the last thing that I want to talk about today. and then we can get to some questions at the end of this. I don't want to spend a lot of time on it, but what I do want to do is talk to you a little bit about this right here, which is the Tascam um, audio unit that you can buy separately for a number of different cameras. This is the CA XLR 2D. This is the F version for Fuji, and so far I'm pretty impressed with it. You can see here that it's relatively large. I think part of that might be that it is a 4-channel. So you've got 2 XLR inputs. You have a 3.5 millimeter, 1/8 inch input as well, which could be stereo going into the camera. And if we compare that, just for comparison, this is like a Sony one. This is only a 2-channel, but it is considerably smaller. It's hefty, it's got to have a little bit of weight to it. This one is relatively light, but I'm overall very impressed with the feature sets of this. If you're going around and doing a lot of work with a camera like this, you do need some sort of more professional audio solution. So right now I just have the wireless Go going into input 2 with a little adapter, and then into input 1, I just have this little NT55 going into XLR channel 1. Haven't done a lot of battery testing so far with this, but it's being powered, if you choose it to, by the camera itself. And you can actually see that right here. See if I punch in a little bit more. You can see right over here that we have the ability to do it by battery or not. And I actually attached the battery unit here so you could see it. It's this little thing that runs off of a couple of AA batteries, and you can decide to do that, or there's a little cover that can just go back onto this unit and cover that up if you want to. The other thing that's, I think, pretty cool is this is communicating with the hot shoe. It has contacts, so it's getting powered by the camera itself. But there is in the box, which to me is pretty huge, the cold shoe version of this. So this is the universal. So they actually include this. So if you're not using this with a Fuji camera, you just swap this out. You'd obviously be battery powering it. So you'd be using this little battery powered unit along with the universal cold shoe mount. And then you'd just be plugging in your stuff into the camera. The difference is that the audio data is not being pushed into the camera now through the hot shoe. So also included is your little 3.5 to 3.5 millimeter cable, which will essentially come out of this and go into your camera system, right? So you go out of the back here and then you go into the camera. And then in terms of functionality, when we're talking about what's inside of here, we open up this little door and it's got all the stuff that you would expect to see. We've got, which channels you're inputting. I'm doing 1 and 2. If I do this 1 and 2 link option, that's really tying these together in terms of it's like in a car when you're changing the temperature. It's tying these dials and these options in together so that they work together. And you can see we've got line and mic in. We've got an attenuator where we can lower the amount that's coming into the camera there. We've got a low cut filter that we could do. I'd probably at least set that to like 80 on here. Though if you think you've got lower frequencies than that, you could do it. And then you also have your pots here, which I've set to unity, a limiter, auto versus manual. I'd almost always use manual. And then, of course, you have phantom power, depending on how you're doing it. So right now I have channel 1, which is this. This right here is set to phantom, and then the wireless Go is just set to normal mic in. So that's kind of how I have it set up. On the back of here, there's actually a volume, so you can monitor from the unit itself or through camera, and you can switch between the two. And, you know, it's not rocket science here. It's an XLR adapter, but I think one of the things that we should do is you should basically, you know, we should take a listen to at least the microphone in a minute, and I'll show you a couple of things that I think might be worthwhile. So going back into the menu here, internal mic level adjustment. This does nothing to the actual adapter unless you are using that internal. External mic level adjustment has nothing to do with this unit. So if I turn that off, I'm still going to get levels here, as you can see. So right now I only have the shotgun or the boomed mic, the NT55 plugged in right now. But if I turn on, which I'm going to do right now, the wireless go, just so that we have a second mic on, which I'm going to do. I'm just turning the transmitter and the receiver on. Now we should see levels here, and that's the wireless go. Okay. So the, again, menu here for external mic level adjustment has nothing to do with this audio unit when you're using it. That's all being changed down here in XLR mic adapter setting. You go inside of here and you choose whether or not you're doing a 4-channel, which is XLR plus camera. Are you doing 2-channel? And then how are you monitoring? So there's a lot of options inside of here. Let's take a look at that 4-channel. You'll see that I now have 4 channels going in here. And I'm not sure how the 3rd channel works when you're plugging a 3.5 millimeter mic into here, into channel 3 or input 3. My guess is it's getting mixed with one of the other inputs. I need to look into that. That is the one thing that I feel like I have not sorted yet on this little audio adapter. But effectively, let's just go ahead and listen to just the XLR inputs that are coming in through the audio unit. And what I want to do is actually, you'll see that I have that turned on. We're seeing both channels here. I'm not going to use the wireless go right now. I'm going to turn that off. And I just want everybody to hear the, basically the on-camera mic that I have and what that's going to sound like. And then we can compare that a little bit to the microphone that is being used for the actual live stream. So let me go over here. Right now, I'm going to go ahead and talk to this. I'll be about about an arm's length away from the microphone. Right now, you're still hearing this microphone up here, the NTG5, but this is the NT55. I'm going to switch over to now, turning off this. And now we should be hearing the microphone that is on camera on the X-H2S. Now, quite honestly, I'm pretty impressed with the preamps of this unit. I think it's very quiet. You will hear more ambience right now, but part of that is completely due to the fact that on the MixPre 6.2, I have the noise assist feature on, which is kind of magical, or I like to say smagical, which is super magical. So let me go ahead and change that. I'm going to walk over to the MixPre 6.2, and I'm going to turn off noise assist. So you're not going to hear it, and then we can switch between the two. And you'll hear that we'll hear ambience on both. I wish they would get noise assist now into all these cameras. So let me go ahead and do that. I'll be back in a second. I'm going to switch back to this microphone for the time being. And actually, no, I won't. I'll just point that in the direction I'm going in. It'll be, what it is. All right, so I'm going over here. I'm going to pop into this channel, and I'm going to dial noise assist away. Actually, I am now going to go ahead and switch to this mic so you can hear the difference when I'm dialing noise assist out. Okay, so here we go, switching over. Okay, now we're back to this boomed mic that I use. Give me 1 second. Okie dokie. That's noise assist now off on the X-T3 X2. So you should hear more ambience. You should hear the room a little bit more. And let's switch between this and now the on-camera mic that I have. They're in slightly different positions, but you get the idea. Here we go. This is the live stream mic, and now switching over to the other mic. And now we're on the other mic. So you can hear that they are different mics. We are going through a different audio device. And the X-T3 X2 is going to have very quiet preamps, but still very impressed with what I'm getting from this unit going directly to that. Pretty easy to clean that up in post-production, in my opinion. I'm going to go ahead and turn on noise assist again. I'm going to switch back to the main mic, and you'll hear that kind of dialing itself in where you'll, if you're listening closely, you'll hear the ambience change in the room, and then it's going to dial out exterior noise. So here we go. Okay, coming back. Hopefully you you heard those differences, and you can see what noise assist is doing as I use that for the stuff that I'm doing. So here we are. It is about 7 minutes before the end, and that's kind of an overview of some of the stuff that I've been finding out about with this X-H2S. Big things for me, it would be great if we get a little bit of an improvement on the AF, even more than is there now. I'd like to see a little more improvement there. I know that there are certain things that prevent that from happening. A lot of what's happened with Sony and Canon over the years is they've developed that and built that into their sensor technology and what they're doing. And again, this is better than the X-T4, but it could definitely go another notch. Like my Zebras to go below 50. Really like to be able to choose film simulations versus log and where they're going. And yeah, the Tascam, could definitely get its own show and get into that some more. This one I have in from B&H right now. So the question for me is this something I need in my kit for this camera? And for me at the moment with the X-T3 X2, which is definitely bigger than this, I'm not sure that I need to have this because the X-T3 X2 is giving me 32-bit float. It's giving me noise assist. It has mix assist if I want to use it. So it has functionality, but it's also a more expensive box. So yeah, I think that if you're not in the market for something like a X-T3 3 or 6 2, meaning the 3 is slightly smaller, less inputs, then I think this is a good option. I think that this is going to give functionality to your Canon or Fuji or whatever camera it is that you're using. If it's Sony, I'd probably just go with Sony's own solution, which they have, and you can, they keep updating this. And there's one that you can use for the FX30, which works in a very similar way. But if you're not using a Sony camera, then or a Panasonic camera, which also has its own solution, then I would say, Canon or Fuji, 100%. I would be thinking about this for a mirrorless camera if you're using this as essentially your A camera that you're going to be feeding audio into. And even if you are feeding audio in, recording audio separately. You're doing double system sound. For a production where you have a sound recordist or you're feeding, wireless hops or other mics into here, even if it's just for better quality reference as opposed to a scratch, then this is a good option for sure. And we've got a couple of questions. EVF, I like. I tend to use the external screen more, or like a small HD monitor. So that tends to be my workflow when I'm using the camera out there. But it is a good EVF, and I like the quality of it. And it's, one of the things, maybe when we talk about something like the FX30, that's different about this camera. This is really a hybrid camera, whereas to me, the FX30 is really more of a cinemaized, a cinema version of, something that they would have for a more hybrid style camera. So we'll see. And then with Fuji, the lens choice affects AF so much. The newer lenses are much better. Agreed. I did notice that the 16 to 55, which is a Rockstar lens, which I use a lot on the X-H2S, tends to have less issues than, let's say, the little, I was using the little 35, and I was actually seeing more moire with that, which was interesting. So we'll see. Thaddeus, jam timecode using something like a tentacle, which goes through the audio input of the camera. It's not something that's really part of my workflow, but a sound recordist will have that in their kit so they can jam to, larger cameras over BNC, and then they can do it to smaller cameras over 3.5 millimeter. So there's solutions now from Tentacle and Deity and stuff for that. So there you go. I don't know, Rick, if they'll get edited out. I haven't decided how I'm doing that, but I've got a question from 360 Grad. Jem, sorry, but a question not related to this cam. Do you or someone in the chat have any experience with the Rodecaster Pro 2, and does it come with a good noise gate too? I do not have experience with it, but I have one over there. And I am thinking about the application of that because it's a very powerful tool, especially for people who are doing podcasting. I think what I don't want to lose, and I'm going to have to start testing it, is noise assist from my Mix Pre 6.2, because when I'm doing stuff here, it's so incredibly quiet now using noise assist. But I know that the preamps are very good in the Rodecaster Pro 2. I know that it has great audio processing. I don't think it has something like noise assist, but I need to dig into that. Obviously, that's not a solution for out in the field necessarily, unless you're setting up for a remote podcast. But I'm very interested in the product and what its potential is and what it can do. And I'm pretty excited about what Rode's doing in general. I'm hoping they go into some other product categories that they haven't gone into yet. So there you go. Look, we're a minute out. Any other questions? Don't forget my workshop if you're interested. It's going to be a full day. I couldn't afford the noise assist either, 360 Grad. It's $300 US, but I use it every single day. So I had to look at it and say, is this well, for me, it's like at 80 to 100% of the time I'm using it. And that's why I took the leap. It was money out of my pocket, but I haven't regretted getting noise assist, which you can't do on the original Mix Pre's, but you can definitely do it on the version 2s. Rick, that's a funny comment, but I've been asking Fuji for zebras under 50% since the X-T3. So I don't know if that's going to happen. What is this? Wait, what is this currency here? 360 grad. What you talking about, Willis? There it is. No other questions. Thank you. You're amazing. I appreciate it. It's like a touche right there. Awesome. Thank you. So, any other questions? We're going to wrap this one up. Hopefully you learned something, or at least you pretend to learn something. By the way, pretty exciting. There is some stuff happening in the C47 land. I'm kind of down to 2 LMSs, which are learning management systems. And I'm looking at Thinkific, which pissed me off because they just changed their pricing. I've been doing all this research. And Teachable. And what I want to do is start creating small lessons that are very specific to production, that are cost effective, that I think initially is going to be all focused on different styles of lighting for interviews, because that's really, for a lot of us, the bread and butter of what we do. So, working on that. Hopefully have some stuff happening pretty soon. If you are thinking about doing the workshop in New York, let me know. I can get you a discount. I don't create the prices for these things. I just create what the workshop's going to be. I'm kind of part of a bigger machine when it comes to that, and they have to price it based on what kind of workshop it is, the costs involved. And in this case, it's in New York City. It's in a giant production space that is in Chelsea. So that alone, to have for essentially 2.5 days, for getting everything in there, setting up, and then the full day for the workshop, is a huge expense. And then, just all of the logistics in terms of craft services. And, I believe they're going to be including a lunch for the attendees, and then getting equipment there and all that fun stuff. But I'm excited. This is going to be a really fun time to do that workshop. Does it work? There it is. That's the workshop, Sunday, October 16th in Nueva York. They've got some good food there, I promise. I grew up there. You go to ppw-conference.com, and there'll be a link to the workshops there. It's all part of NAB New York. So that means that once you want to sign up for it, if you do, then you go to NAB's site. You have to fill out a ton of stuff because it's kind of there. And the discount is, man, I got to look it up real quick. You can just send me an email to contact@thec47.com. But it's just hold on, give me 1 second, and I'll put it in the actual chat over here. And why don't you ask me questions while I'm doing that? Because I'm firing up the email. I'm looking that up because that's what's going to tell me what this code is. Is this it? Maybe, maybe not. It's PPC 15 when you fill out stuff, and it asks you for a code. PP 15 is the 15% off. That's what they're giving. Hey, I just work here and teach stuff, but it's going to be hands-on. It's going to have a lot of stuff going on there, so I'm excited about it. I think that's it. I don't know what these little pop-ups are that are showing up here that are... Oh, where's the info about the challenge, Thaddeus? It's right on the C47 YouTube channel, which you're on right now. You just go to the start of there. You'll see the live stream, and it has the rules and all that stuff. And you can find out more about it. But it's essentially like the last challenge. It's an inspired frame challenge. So good place to go might be Shot Deck and find a film or a TV show that's inspiring the frame that you create. I guess you can take inspiration from the entire thing, but it's generally better if you're doing something that is very specific to a frame, maybe that people might recognize. So I was pretty sure people weren't going to recognize mine last time, and I was pleasantly surprised. That's what I got for you, kids. I'm heading off into Workland again. I had a great time working on that doc last week. It was really great to be out on location with a group of people, and docs are always more interesting than real life. And, well, scratch that, reverse. Docs are real life and are always more interesting than the movies. Nonfiction is generally more interesting than fiction. Who knew? All right, kids. Till next time. See you next week. Cameron Flask. Take care.